Hi, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my podcast. Today, the first is to introduce myself again. I'm Dr. Jaime Daniel, and as usually, I want to share with you some medical themes to help you to prevent and to get more knowledge about it. And of course, I do understand that there are things very common that probably we are not aware the mechanisms or the symptoms. We just see some signs, but we are not aware what is going on before them. So now I want to talk about nauseas and vomiting. Well, if we want to define nausea, we realize that it has a variety of definitions that in general they point to the regard as an unpleasant sensation of being about to vomit. Also, it goes with something called diaphoresis, which is increased respiratory and heart rate disengagement from one's surrounding, and other features can accompany it. And nausea is often associated with vomiting. And vomiting is the forceful expulsion of gastric contents. Okay, so if you've been asking, hey doctor, you've been talking about vomiting, but you haven't defined it. Yes, here we have with one definition. Vomiting is a forceful expulsion of gastric contents. And around this problem, we also get something called dyspepsia and other gastrointestinal symptoms. However, nausea can occur without vomiting, and less commonly, vomiting occurs without nausea, which means that one cannot depend upon the other. Nausea is often more bothersome and disabling than the vomiting. Yes, when you have nausea or you're getting nauseous, you cannot do a lot of things. You cannot move. You cannot see light, probably because you're suffering from a headache. But it is resulting in nausea. So therefore, it's limiting you to do things. But once you got the vomiting, it disappeared and you feel better in most of the cases. Well, by the other hand, nausea is often more bothersome. So, reaching different vomiting in the absence of expulsion of gastric content, but it often precedes vomiting. Also, in addition, patients may confuse the vomiting with regurgitation. Those are quite different things, remember. When you are getting vomiting, it is a mechanism of the body has to protect itself. When probably thinks that something has gone wrong, probably intoxicated or something about it. But when you are getting regurgitation or reflux, we are talking about the condition named gastritis. So it can produce to you some discomfort, especially when you're trying to sleep or when you are doing some things or when you eat a bit more than the usual, and then you start to feel acid in your mouth, and probably it's very uncomfortable. Probably not. It is very uncomfortable. Even it prevents you to do exercises or to do more extensive tasks in your work, in your house. So, there are some guidelines that issued the American Gastroenterological Association to manage this nausea and vomiting. But of course, there is explanation about what is going on in our bodies. The normal function of the upper gastrointestinal tract involves an interaction between the gut and the central nervous system. The motor function of the gut is controlled at three main levels. Pay attention, three main levels. The first level, it's about the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Well, probably you never heard about them, maybe yes, but you need to know that one of them, the sympathetic, calls you to action, and the parasympathetic calls you to the opposite, to stay calm, to relax. But it is in general because in our body there are parts that works different. But in general, it's how it happens. And by other part, we have what is known as enteric brain neurons. It's sometimes people think it is by even in the name like a brain, a second brain, due to all the stuff that our intestine and stomach need to coordinate and do to achieve a proper digestion, to absorb nutrients, and all those things that the body needs to keep healthy. And the last, the smooth muscle cells. Of course, your colon needs to propel towards the food, and to do that, it needs to use some kind of pushing that is produced by muscle, but not any kind. The smooth muscle cells. Well, about the nausea, gastric rhythm disturbance is a peripheral mechanism underlying nausea. And I said again, gastric rhythm disturbance. So it means that for some reason the food is not going in through the way it should be. So probably this is a congestion, if we want to put an example, a traffic jam, no? So nausea correlates with a shift in the normal 3 cycle per minute gastric myoelectrical activity. There are some scientists that got the time to study and measure the speed by which the food goes throughout the entire gastric system. And due to these things, you can also experience an increased frequency, which is known also as a tachygastria, or a reduced frequency known as a bradygastria. In motion thickness induced by vection, when you are rotating like a drum with black and white vertical stripes around seated stationary subjects. What I said is when you just spinning, you are spinning like again when you see a child, or children. When you see a child or children, they play a lot just spinning around. And in that particular case, you will be suffering nausea, and also tachygastria that precedes nausea. And this is a proportion to the degree of the tachygastria. We also have some cases with drug-induced normalization of tachygastria to improve nausea. So if you are paying attention, you will understand that before nausea appears, there is tachygastria. So if we can delay or slow or control this tachygastria, probably the nausea is not showing up. However, such dysrhythmia may not underline all causes of nausea. Yes, of course, there are plenty causes to produce nausea. And if we want to talk about vomiting, well, it's a reflex, as I told you before, that allows animals and persons to get rid itself of ingested toxins or poisons, or things that the body believes are that kind. It came to be activated by central or peripheral neuronal stimuli or by humoral stimuli. Multiple afferent and efferent pathways exist which induce vomiting. I mean, you are getting a lot of ways to finally get vomiting. So we wanna tell you a few of them. First, there is an area postrema in the floor of the fourth ventricle which contains a chemoreceptor trigger zone. It is sensitive to many humoral factors, including neurotransmitters, peptides, drugs, and toxins. I mean, in short, there is a part in your brain that can trigger nauseas. There is also an area in the medulla comprising the nucleus, tractus, solitarius, and reticular formation, serves as a central pattern generator for vomiting, and information from humoral factors via the area postrema and visceral efferents via the vagus nerve converge at this site. Well, if we've been talking about the brain, well, the brain have extensions, all we know as medulla, spinal medulla, and for logic, the spinal medulla also have parts that can trigger the nauseas. And there is also the central pattern generator, presumably projects to the various motor nuclei to elicit the sequential excitation and inhibition that controls vomiting reflex. Well, as I told you in the two last, if the brain and your spine medulla have these mechanisms, of course, there have to be some others, like this, the central pattern generation. Well, but when we are talking about the vagal afferent nerves from the gastrointestinal tract synapse in the medulla, remember, synapse is when one neuron communicates to another neuron. It may fail, yes, and therefore produce nausea. From there, some neurons extend to the area postrema. Remember, postrema area is a place in your brain that can trigger the nausea and vomiting. Other neurons ascend to the paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus and the limbic and cortical regions. So it means it extends to many places in the brain. So it will affect many areas of functions. And therefore, where the gastric electromechanical events are perceived as normal sensations or symptoms, such as a nausea or discomfort, these areas are triggered. Efferent sympathetic neurons mediating nociceptive stimuli, synapses, in the spinal cord and ascend to brainstem nuclei and hypothalamus. In short, we're just describing a way that implies that you can get nausea not only by affecting a part in your brain, and it can show up by activating some other parts in your body. Well, there is, if we want to get more part of the biological or microbiology or biochemistry to understand more about it, There are 5 principal neurotransmitter receptors that mediate vomiting. Neuroreceptors. So what does it mean? That probably there are some medicines that could affect them and therefore induce you to get a vomiting situation or a vomiting state. One of them is the muscarinic type 1, also known as M1. The dopamine, also known as D2, histamine, H1, and 5-hydroxytryptamine, 3-serotonin. The neurokinin 1 and substance P. It is quite interesting because even when you are getting some allergic attack or when you are suffering from influenza or flu, you will take medicines to prevent the symptoms, but they will work in a way that probably will make you feel with some desire to vomit and of course the nausea. Well, there are different ways to get approach to this thing. Of course, the first is to try to figure out the reason. So it means that the etiology should be thought, taking account whether the patient has acute nausea and vomiting or chronic symptoms, at least for 1 month long in duration. And by the second, the consequences or complications of nausea and vomiting, like fluid depletion, hypokalemia, and metabolic alkalosis, should be identified and corrected. Once again, translating, if we are talking about hypokalemia and metabolic alkalosis, they tend to show up due to that you are vomiting. And when you are vomiting, you are losing some of this potassium chloride that will also create a disbalance. So therefore, you will suffer a reduction in kalium, and it is known as an hypokalemia. You will feel very softy, very lacking of force in your muscles, even in your heart rate. It will be beating slower than usually. And about the metabolic alkalosis, well, probably you will start to breathe faster than usual, and therefore it will turn into an answer of your body to compensate it by suffering a tachycardia. So the targeted therapy should be provided when possible. Sometimes could be surgery for bowel obstruction if it is where the cause of the nausea. And in some other cases, the symptoms just only be treated as regular with medicines. And when you are in a hospital, maybe due to some other physical problems, well, in most cases, the cause of nausea and vomiting can be determined from the history and physical examination, and additionally, testing may not be required in otherwise healthy patients or in patients with acute symptoms. If additional testing is needed, it should be guided by symptom duration, frequency and severity, as well as patient comorbidities and characteristics of vomiting episodes and associated symptoms. But we are talking here about a non-pregnant person, a non-pregnant woman. They got a different management and a different condition due to the pregnancy. So in that case, it's completely normal to get nauseas and vomiting till they delivered, no, to delivery day. Well, I just wanted to share with you this part. Probably I'm just getting too long in this podcast today. But we will talk about this in some other episode. So this is Dr. Jaime Daniel, and thank you for your company in my podcast. Goodbye.